good morning, good evening, or good night, whichever one it is for you, whichever one it is. I'm very glad you're here to join me for this week's video, which is gonna be the wrap up of all of the books I read in November, which is an exciting month because November means December is next, and December means it's Christmas slash holiday slash festive time slash winter slash the best time of all of the year, the best reading time of all of the year. Nothing tops winter to me, in my personal opinion. And some of the books I read this month actually reflect my very wintry mood because I have already started my festive reading. And yeah, I am not apologizing for that because nothing makes me happier. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right in because the first book I read in the month of November, I actually listened to. It's an audiobook and I had started listening to it in October and I finished very early on in November. And that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is about this young student, a college student, who moves to a different town to enter this specific college, where he becomes involved with this very elitist group of students who are being taught by a professor who only teaches this one class. This student becomes involved with that group of people, becomes involved with that class, with that professor, and we just kind of follow him as he becomes very deeply entrenched in the messy, morbidly fascinating relationships and interpersonal just dynamics that are going on within this little group of people. And the setup of this story is quite interesting because from the very first line, we know someone is going to die. A student of this group of people is going to die, and we even know who. And we know who before we even meet the student. And we get reminded of who's gonna die several times throughout the story. And so we kind of already know what happened, but now we're trying to figure out why it happened and how it exactly happened, what led up to it. And this really is kind of just the story of a group of very spoiled, selfish, rich people who are so removed from the real life consequences of their actions that they seem almost sociopathic. There's so much ego, so much selfishness, so much hypocrisy going on here. It's like a car crash you can't look away from. And obviously, The Secret History is the dark academia story, and it talks a lot about elitism within these institutions, how corrupt they are, and what that can lead to within people. But it does kind of attempt to talk about more than that, because Donna Tartt basically took this very small sample size of society, put them into a situation that is completely unrealistic. But somehow this ends up being such a great sociological and psychological study of what happens to people in these extreme settings. Because really, this is a very universal story in that sense, because what it says about people, in my opinion, is very intelligent. And it does kind of work universally, although the story itself is very much not universal just in the things that actually happen in it. The thing is just, to me, this wasn't quite as successful as I was hoping. I've read all of Donna Tartt's work now, and I think she's just much better if she writes longer books. This is very much a character-driven story. Not much actually happens in the book. I know that sounds crazy because someone dies, but the characters are kind of front and center, and their dynamics and their psychology and what leads them to do the things they do and what ends up happening afterwards. That is kind of the center focus of this story. But that doesn't really work if these characters just feel one-dimensional. And the entire story kind of felt that way. The atmosphere was there, and I think there were a lot of core elements that would have been very successful if these characters felt more fleshed out. Because to me, I could not, well, of course I couldn't relate to any of them, but I don't think a relatable character is needed. You just need a character who you can understand. A fully fleshed out character that's kind of intrinsic to any story. I did not feel that way about any of these characters. It all felt extremely surface level, and that led to the themes that were being talked about also feeling very surface level, because there's so much talked about here. But none of it was being done justice because of the way the story was executed. And I think the huge issue here is the story was just too short. I think if Donna Tartt had given herself like 200 pages more or so, then this might have been a really, really brilliant story. And of course, this is my own opinion. I know this story is very popular and a lot of people really, really love it. And that's great for you. But for me personally, it just wasn't very successful. But it is still a very entertaining story, and I think it could work for a lot of people. So maybe do still check it out. Who knows? Maybe you will really like it. Then I read Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, which is set in the weeks leading up to Halloween, and we follow these two young boys. They're about 12 years old. And they are best friends, although they are very much polar opposites. And one day, a very mysterious carnival comes to the town they live in, which leads to some very weird and strange and possibly sinister occurrences. The experience of those two young boys is kind of contrasted with the experiences one of their father is having at the same time, who has a much different outlook on life than them. He is much more disillusioned with life. I have read The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury, which I really liked, but Something Wicked This Way Comes is on an entirely different level. It made me fall in love with the way Ray Bradbury writes, because this is an artist with words. I don't know how else to describe this. It kind of kept reminding me of the writing in Ulysses, but whereas Ulysses kind of reads like James Joyce took some sort of substance and just wrote down any kind of thought that came to mind and then kind of infused a lot of psychology and just abstract things into the story, Ray Bradbury's writing is so much more restrained, so much more brilliant in my opinion because of it. Because every single word in this story felt so just purposeful. It kind of feels like a mixture of Ulysses' writing combined with Virginia Woolf's writing. The way he wrote this story, it's poetry basically. This story is a 200-page poem with so much symbolism, and it's such an intelligent handling of the horror genre, a kind of handling that I've never seen before anywhere, because the main horror of this story comes from the concept of aging, of time's passing, of loss of control, of regret and fear, which are kind of all personified within the attractions of this carnival. And that in itself is brilliant and so mind-blowing. But then it also turns into this philosophical exploration of humanity and of life, of good and evil, and of the purpose we have. I was so just astonished by what Ray Bradbury is capable of. It's so strangely beautiful, and I am so glad I stumbled upon the masterpiece that is Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I highly recommend you check that one out. I don't know. I don't see anyone not loving it. It's such a good book. And then I read another very good book, which was World Light by Haldor Laxness, which is about Olaf, who is a young orphan. At the beginning of the story, he's being raised by a family that lives on a farm in rural Iceland near the ocean. And Olaf is very much all alone in the world. He's impoverished, he isn't being treated very well by the people that are supposed to care for him, and he doesn't really get people, but what he gets is nature. He has this kind of almost spiritual love for nature. It's like nature is his god in a way. He sees nature as God's personification almost. And he develops this dream of wanting to express this absolute reverence he has for nature through poetry. So he kind of starts seeing himself as a poet. But being a poet in Iceland during this time we are set in, it's not going to set you up for a very nice life. Olaf gets into a lot of trouble throughout his life as he's trying to be a poet, and as we're following him, trying to find his place in the world, trying to follow his dream, but getting into so much trouble with people because they don't see him trying hard enough to have a successful life or to do his job, add value to society, which is a main theme here. This is very much the kind of story only Haldor Laxness could write. It's so filled with poetry, with nature, with beauty, with these vivid and unique deep characters, and a story that, if anyone else handled it, would feel so bleak and depressing and sad. But with Haldor Laxness writing it, it sort of feels optimistic almost. It feels entertaining, engaging, alive, and just like a very real story. It's a talent that only this man has, and it's a story that only this man could write. Olaf himself is an interesting main character. He is very pure-hearted, almost naive. He reads like a child, although he very much does grow up, and he is very intelligent. But he's also, well, his upbringing hasn't allowed him to develop very many social skills or just skills of survival in general. He struggles so much with people, with survival, but he never loses sight of this almost childlike sense of wonder he has for the world. And Laxness manages to upkeep this very delicate balance between talking about incredibly serious topics, but making them almost feel lighthearted. I think the reason for that is just Laxness's very unique kind of humor. I think it's a very special one, and I think you might really enjoy Worldlight by Haldor Laxness. Then I listened to Persuasion by Jane Austen. This was a reread, or rather a re-listen. I read it the first time, but this year I decided to listen to it because I got very much in the mood for some Jane Austen, and Persuasion was one of my two favorites. It's always been between Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion, and I just felt the need to re-experience Persuasion, so I did. Persuasion is about Anne Elliot, who's in her late 20s, and about 7 years ago, she was engaged to a very nice young man who she really cared for. But because of his lack of social standing and just wealth, her family, who was of nobility, persuaded her to call off said engagement, so she did. And now, at the point we're following her, we're 7 years later, the man who she used to be engaged to, Wentworth, he is now a well-to-do captain for the army, much wealthier than Anne Elliot and her family themselves are. And it's kind of about him orbiting her life once again and them coming back into contact and all of these old feelings resurfacing. Anne's family is absolutely horrible. Every single person that she is involved with, other than Wentworth, is just very much hard to like. But it's a kind of thing where, well, Jane Austen manages to create these characters that you just love to hate. They are so unlikable, but so entertaining and just funny. This is a story that is so heartfelt. There is so much heart here. Anne herself, I just absolutely loved her. She's so mature, she's smart, she's level-headed, she is so kind and selfless, and she deserves all of the love. And I just adore the love story between her and Wentworth because I think they're both equally kind, equally precious. They deserve each other. They're so good for each other. And that letter, I mean, I don't think I have to say anything about that letter. And as with any Jane Austen work, this book includes a lot of social commentary, specifically towards class and gender roles, but also the expectations that society has specifically on women. Jane Austen just has a very unique way of handling those topics. Persuasion now on a reread is my favorite Jane Austen. I can confidently say that because I also re-listened to Sense and Sensibility, which also is a reread. Again, I read that the first time and now I decided to re-listen to it because after listening to Persuasion, I needed to know if Sense and Sensibility was even better. So Sense and Sensibility is about two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, who with their mother, due to unforeseen financial difficulties, have to move into this cottage in a different town. At the center of the story is this concept of sense, which is embodied through Eleanor, one of the sisters. She's very level-headed, very rational, very much in her head. She's a kind of brain-focused person, whereas Marianne, her sister, is the exact opposite. She's the sensibility. She's very emotional. She's very impulsive. She's very in her feelings, and she's the heart-driven of the two. And it's about how different they are, but how fiercely devoted they are to each other and how much they love each other. And yes, there are love stories here. It's a very typical Jane Austen in the setup and in the way the story gets resolved. But to me, what makes the story so special is the dynamic between those two sisters, which I just think is so beautifully handled. And it's such a feel-good story because of it. Again, it includes the social commentary about class, about the expectations on women, and specifically specifically in this book, something that was also very relevant to Jane Austen's life herself is this concept of women being completely dependent on the men in their lives, and how if those people don't treat them well, their entire lives kind of get ruined, how unfair that concept is. I really, really love Sense and Sensibility. Both Persuasion and Sense and Sensibility to me are just perfect books. After that, I had my heart broken and mended because I decided to read A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachmann, my very first Bachmann, and certainly not my last, which is about Ove, who's in his late 50s. He's 59 years old and he's just been let go from his job. It's all about his struggles coming to terms with living in a world that he doesn't quite like. He doesn't like the way things work now. He doesn't really like people all that much, which is kind of relatable, honestly. Although, like, Ove is one of those characters, he's very relatable, but he takes things very far, maybe too far at some points. But I don't really want to tell you anything more about it, because this is the kind of story where it's the best if you don't know anything. Just know that Ove is one of the most precious characters ever. He has such a hard shell, and at the beginning it's kind of almost entertaining how disillusioned and how just cynical he was. But then you get to know him and you get to see what a soft person he really is. And there's this family that moves in next door to him who he kind of develops a relationship with, which is so beautiful to read about. And it's about community and love and redemption, or just healing and trauma. There's a lot of serious stuff that goes on in this story, and you learn a lot about what Ove has been through, and it's quite sad at certain points. It feels like it's too much, it's too moving, but in a very beautiful way. And it's the kind of book it handles every one of its themes with so much kindness and grace and humor that it feels lighthearted the whole way through. It feels very wholesome, but like there's a lot of substance in it. It's the perfect combination. And every one of the characters is so cool. I fell in love with all of them. This is the kind of story where you are going to feel every single emotion you are humanly capable of feeling. And I think it is a very, very well done story. Might I say perfect? It is not going to be the last Frederick Bachmann I read. Definitely not, because I really, really like the way that man writes. Then I read The Fortnight in September by R.C. Sheriff, which is about a family going on their annual holiday to the coast of England. We're set in about the 1930s. We meet them as they get ready to embark on their journey, on their holiday, and we see just the minutiae of their planning, because every single aspect of this holiday, of the preparation for the holiday, is planned to the T, because they have been going on this holiday for over 2 decades. And I saw a review of this book somewhere that said something like, nothing and yet everything happens in this book. And I don't think that could be more true. This family is made up of entirely ordinary people doing something very normal. But because of that, it feels so realistic and so vivid. And each of them struggles with their own things. They all have the personalities they show each other, but then they have their private concerns and topics they deal with. They love each other, but there's also a lot of complicatedness beyond that. And as we get to learn about their dynamics and their personalities and just the holiday, we literally get to go on holiday with them. That's really what this feels like you're going on holiday. And I absolutely adored it. It's so beautiful in its simplicity. And I'm very grateful to Jane, dear Jane, because you recommended this book to me, and I could not be happier to have read it, because it's one of my favorites of this month, certainly. It's such a good story, and it made me feel just so pleasant. It felt very much like a cozy, perfect November read. Although it's called The Fortnight in September, it's universally great no matter when you read it. And then I read Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, which is about a man. The narrator is an unnamed man who goes to this town called Starkfield, and there he learns of this mysterious man in his 50s called Ethan Frome, who he sees from afar, and he sees how that man looks much older and much more weathered than his 52 years should call for. And people keep dropping all of these hints of information that he has had a very difficult life. And our narrator becomes very curious. And one day he meets Ethan Frome personally, which kind of leads him to decide to write down Ethan Frome's life story. And that is what we're going to be reading. We're going to be reading about Ethan Frome's life story, the story of his marriage, and the things that happen in his life when the cousin of his wife comes to town and stays with them for a while. It is so bleak and so depressing, but Edith Wharton is an incredible writer, so it's also very beautiful. Starkfield is this town where in the winter, which is where we're set, the snow becomes so deep that the town kind of becomes isolated from all other places, which enhances the helplessness and the suffocation these people feel. Despite how beautifully the town is written, the nature descriptions are, and how magical it almost feels. It's this very interesting contrast that's set up. It's not a feel-good story, but it is a very good story. And the ending blew my mind. I see the merit of it, and I know why people love it. I think it's an incredible story, but it's too dark for my personal liking. I don't like those kinds of books, certainly not in the winter. The winter is where I like to read wholesome books, books that feel healing, books that feel nice, not books that feel just like the absolute bleakest aspect of human life possible, which is what this book is. But again, it has so much merit because of it, so I can't say it's a bad book because, my goodness, it is not a bad book. It is a very good book, just maybe not the kind of book for me personally. So yeah, that was Edith Wharton's Ethan Frome. Then I read the most healing story ever. You can tell the effect that Ethan Frome had on me because I decided to read Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne, decorated by E.H. Shepard. He's the one who illustrated the book originally. The narrator sits down to tell Christopher Robin, who's presumably his son, about the adventures that his toy bear, Winnie the Pooh, gets up to in this fantasy magical world where all of the toys that this Christopher Robin, the young boy, has come to life and go on these experiences and adventures and get up to all sorts of shenanigans. And it's so beautiful. There's Winnie the Pooh, of course, the toy bear. There's Piglet the pig. There's Eeyore, the very melancholy donkey. And so many other very lovable characters. It is a children's book and it reads like one, but it also reads like just a healing story for any age. It's one of those books that I don't think you can ever grow out of. And it's a very intrinsic part of my childhood. I have so many memories of Winnie the Pooh, and I loved revisiting that world as an adult. It's so wise. It kind of teaches children about concepts like depression through the character of Eeyore, and just kindness, compassion, friendship, love, but in this absolutely compassionate and beautiful way. It's such a precious story. I cannot even express how much I loved it. Winnie the Pooh is just one of those quintessential stories for me. And I am so glad I reread that one. Then I read His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, which is a trilogy made up of The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. They are 3 books, but I kind of can't tell you anything because at a certain point everything is a spoiler. But what I can tell you is the main character is called Lyra. She's about 12 years old at the beginning of the story. And this kind of functions as a coming-of-age story in a very interesting setting, because we are set in a world that is kind of like ours, but also not really. It is fantasy, and it feels kind of historic, but also just different, like a fantasy world with very much historical elements. This is a world where people have demons, but demons are just basically outside manifestations in the form of animals of their own souls. You are one being but 2 beings. I think honestly that's maybe my favorite part of this story, because every single person has a different kind of demon. I just kept wondering, what kind of demon would I have? I think that's such a fun element to this story. I kind of wish I had a demon, honestly. I kind of wish that were a real thing, because I would love that so much. That is beside the point. So anyway, Lyra finds out that their world is kind of endangered by this mysterious dark force, and she's sort of connected to that. She's the one who's gonna have to save the world, basically. I particularly loved the first book because it sets up so much. It's so incredibly engaging. It is so snowy. We're in the deep north for a lot of it. We're in Svalbard for a lot of it. And there's ice bears, which I loved. Jorek, or however you say that name, this ice bear character, I just adored him. He's my favorite. I love that dude. His Dark Materials is kind of made up of a lot of different concepts that Philip Pullman took and made his own thing out of. There's aspects of evolutionary theory, there's aspects of experimental and theoretical physics, there's so much philosophy, there's a lot of the Bible in here, of biblical themes in general. I think that's where I'll stop because I don't want to give anything away, because although this is a 3-part series, I think you should go into it knowing as little as you can. It's exactly what I was looking for. It's snowy, it's magical, it's beautiful. There's so many just lovable characters, and the people Lyra meets on her journey, the people that become very closely connected to her, the things we find out about her, how complex these characters themselves are. It's the kind of story where you think you know who's good and who's bad, but then things kind of turn and your perspective changes. And it's one of those stories that make it very clear that good and bad are perspectives, they're not facts. It's the kind of story you can enjoy and understand when you're 12, but you can also enjoy and understand when you're 80, because it's just your outlook on life changes, your knowledge changes, and so your outlook on the story kind of changes. And I would really be interested to see how I feel about the story, maybe in 20 years to come or so. And yeah, I really loved it. I was so glad I picked it up because it's the perfect thing for this time of the year. The first book is very snowy. The latter books aren't really as much, but they're still so magical, so they feel very apt for the season. And yeah, again, I'm just very happy I read his Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. And with that, we're at the end of the video because those were all of the books I read and finished in the month of November. A very nice month, a very cozy month, a month of magical and beautiful reads and some very bleak ones, but it's the balance. It's all in the balance, my people. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, for being here. If you have anything to say about any of the books I mentioned, please let me know. And if you've read any really good books this month, please let me know about those as well, because I'm always interested to find out about what you're getting up to in your reading journey. And yeah, thank you for being here. I hope you're having a nice day. If you are not having a nice day, that is fine too. I'm thinking about you either way. And I'm already looking forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, bye-bye.